Okay, so I want to show you how to go through the Olympic project that we had in class step by step so that if you weren't able to do it, you could watch this video and go through every step along the way. So if you take your calculator out, what I'm going to do is just go through the calculator like I was doing this for the first time. And the first thing that we would want to do is turn our diagnostics on. So I would go to second 0, which is catalog, and I'm going to scroll all the way down to where it says diagnostics on. Here's the diagnostics off, but I want to go ahead and go to diagnostics on. I'm going to press return and turn my diagnostics on so you can see that it's done. Then I want to enter my values into my calculator. So I'm going to go to the stat button, which is right here, and I get this sub menu, edit, calc, and test. I want to edit and edit my lists. So I'm going to press return. And you can see I already have my lists entered in there. If you're doing this for the first time and you need to enter your lists and you want to clear what's in there, well then you can go ahead and put your cursor above list 1 and press clear and then enter. And everything that you have in that list will disappear. So what I want to do is just keep them in there because I have the values that I want. And just so that you are familiar with this, this is L1 is the years, L2 is the women's gold medal winning times, and in list 3 I put the men's gold medal winning times. And so now what I want to do, you can go ahead and pause the video and enter those lists on your own. You do want to make sure that when you go all the way down to the bottom of the lists that they all end at the same spot. So for example, in my list 1, my last value is in 2008, and you can see all of my lists end at 2008. I don't have anything like one more value here would allow my calculator not to work. So I want to make sure that they're all lined up. Well, then I want to create my regression line. And so I'm going to do my women's regression line first, and I'm going to start by going to stat. Just like we did when we edited our list, except this time I'm not going to edit a list. I want to calculate a linear regression line. So I'm going to move over to calculate. And I want to do a regression line, which is number 4. So I'm going to go down here to number 4. This is a linear regression line. Later on this year, we're going to use a lot of these other regression lines, like a quadratic regression line, cubic regression line, and so on. But for right now, I just want to do a linear regression line, which is number 4, and I'm going to press enter. Now here's where if you have a TI-84 CE plus CE, you get a menu here, and I don't have that menu, but it's going to work the same thing. The first thing that the calculator wants to know is where do the X values reside. And so if you're using a TI-84 plus CE calculator, you get a menu at this spot or at this point, and it's going to ask you specifically for an X list. And so my X values are in list 1. So I'm going to type in second 1 because there's the list 1 there. And now my calculator knows that my X values to calculate this linear regression line are in list 1. And I'm going to put a comma if I'm using a calculator that has a screen that looks like this. And if I'm using the other calculator, then I'm going to go down to the second row which says Y list. And I want to make sure that my Y values are coming from list 2. So I'm going to go down to second and list 2. And I'm going to put another comma in there, which is right above the 7. And so now what I want to do is tell the calculator where to store the information. And so if I was using the other calculator, it would be the 4th line down. It says store REGEQ. Well, here I want to tell the calculator where to store my equation. So I'm going to store it in Y1. But here's what I'm going to do to get to that. I'm going to go ahead and go to vars, and it's Y variables. And I'm going to go to functions and Y1. And so now I have Y1 there. So the calculator now knows that the X values come from list 1, the Y values come from list 2, and I'm going to store the calculator in Y1. And again, if I'm using one of the other calculators, you're going to put where it says store reg EQ, you're going to put Y1 there. And you can also at any time go back and rewatch this video to make sure you know what you're doing. because now I'm going to go to either calculate, or on this calculator I'm just going to press enter. And now it tells me my equation. It's y equals ax plus b, and the a value, that's my slope, is negative 0.0160727. My y-intercept is 42.877. That's the b value that's here. And my correlation coefficient, which is r, is negative 0.88. It's a pretty strong correlation. So now what I want to do is graph this information. So right now, if I go to y equals, let's just say I have nothing here. I'm going to just delete all this, delete everything that's up here so that I don't have, nothing is highlighted, and maybe it'll look like what your calculator looks like. I'm going to clear that equation, and I'm going to clear this one as well. Because right now, if I graph this, nothing would show up. I'm going to go ahead and set my window back to the way that it would normally be, which is Z standard. So right now, if you graph it, nothing shows up because this is 0, year 1, year 2, year 3, and I started at year 1928. And so it's not going to show up. And so to make the graph show up, here's what I'm going to do. I want to start by making sure that I have my equation in there. That's why I put Y1. It stored the women's equation in Y1, but I don't have any plots turned on because these are not highlighted. The only thing that I have is one equation. So I want to turn a plot on. So to do that, I'm going to go to second, Y equals, and you can see all of my plots are off. Well, I want to plot all of the data points that I use to create my linear regression line. And so I'm going to turn a plot on. So I'm at number 1 right now. I'm going to click enter. You can see it's off, but I'm going to click enter with my cursor on the on, so it's now on. I want it to be a scatter plot. I want my x values to come from list 1. I want my y values to come from list 2. And I can either make the marks like open squares or plus signs or dots. I'm just going to keep it as open squares. And so now I could press graph, but it's still not going to show anything up because my window is not far enough over or far enough up. So what I want to do is change my window. Now I could change it manually here, but what I'm going to do is go into the zoom, and I'm going to have it zoom in on my stats that I entered. So I'm going to go to zoom stat, and it's going to zoom right around those points that I put in list 1 and list 2. And now you can see if I press enter, those are all of my scatter plots, or all the squares, and my line of best fit goes right through that information so that I can see exactly what's going on with the women and their 100-meter dash records and my line of best fit that kind of fits that information. So I'm going to do the same process again, except this time instead of creating a line for the women's 100-meter dash, I'm going to create a line for the men's 100-meter dash, which is in my years are in list 1, but my men's years are in list 3. So to create a line of best fit, I'm going to go back to stat. I'm going to go back to calculate. I'm going to move down to linear regression line. I have my old linear regression line for the women, except now I'm going to create one for the men. Where do I want my x values to come from? Well, I want my x values to come from list 1. Those are the years, comma. Where do I want my y values to come from? Well, I want my y values to come from list 3 this time, because they're in list 3 on my lists, comma. This time I want to go put it not in y sub 1 because I don't want to replace my other equation with this equation. I just want a separate equation. So what I'm going to do is put y2 here, y sub 2. So that's variables. It's a y variable. I'm going to put in a function, so I'm going to just click enter on 1. Only this time instead of y1, I'm going to move down to y2. So it's going to be stored in y2. And I'm going to press enter. And there's everything you have for your worksheet. Here's my y equals ax plus b. The slope is negative 0.009. So the men are not improving as fast as the women were. Their y-intercept is 29.0172. It is a strong correlation. It's negative 0.85. But if I graph this information, if I press the graph, you can see that the men's is really not there. I can see part of this, but I don't see any of the points that created this line, and I don't really see all of the line. So I'm going to go back. Right now, I only have one plot on, but I do have two equations. I want to turn the second plot on. So I do that by going to second, y equals. You can see the first plot is on, but I'm going to go down to the second plot and press enter. I want to turn this plot on, so I'm going to press enter. It is a scatter plot that I want, so I'm going to keep that the same. I want my x values to come from list 1. I want my y values to come from list 3. And if I go down here, I could use plus signs just like I did for the women's times, or open squares, but I'm going to use plus signs here so that I can designate between what would be a women's time and a men's time. And so now if I graph it, I can see some of the graph here, but my window is not really where I want it to be. So I could change the window. I can change the window here, or what I could do is go to the zoom. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to zoom, and now I want it to fit all of my zoom stat values, my statistical values, which are in list 1, list 2, and now also list 3. I'll click enter, and now I have the women's times up here with their linear regression line. I have the men's times here with their linear regression line. And so now I have both equations. I have both of the correlation coefficients. If I want to predict what time the men would have in 2052 and what time the women would have in 2052, well, then I would do something like this. I could go to y1. So I'm going to go to y1, which is variables, y variables, functions, y1, and I'm going to put parentheses around this because I'm going to plug in 2052. So the women's time, because y1 is my women's equation. Oops, I typed in 0 there instead of a parenthesis. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to go to variables, y variables, function, y1, and I want to plug in, so I'm going to put parentheses and make this 2052, and I'm going to close those parentheses and press enter. So my women's time in the year 2052 is going to be 9.89 seconds. If I want to do my guys' times, well, they're in equation 2. So I'm going to go to variables, y variables, function. I'm going to move down to y sub 2 because that's the men's equation. I'm going to put parentheses here, and I'm going to put in 2052 for the men, for their equation, and the men will get 9.34 according to my equation. Now, whether this will happen or not, we don't really know. Not until 2052, but that's what my line of best fits, my equations that I can use to predict the future, that's what they're telling me. So they're still not the same. So let's say we want to figure out when will they be the same. Well, I've got to figure out when these two lines cross. So they don't cross on the screen yet. I want to get a picture first of where these two lines cross. So I'm just going to zoom out. I'm going to go to zoom and go down to number 3 and go to zoom out and press enter. So there's my women's equation. Here's my guy's equation. And as long as they intersect on the screen, well, then I can find where that point of intersection is. I might have to zoom out again if they wouldn't have intersected on the screen. But now I can go to this calculate right here. I'm going to go to second trace or second calculate, and I want to calculate an intersection point. So I'm going to go down to number 5, and now you can see there's like a little spider on my first curve. It's asking me, is this your first curve? Yes, it is. So I'm going to click enter. It jumps down to my second curve. It's asking me, is this the second curve? Yes, it is. So I'm going to click enter. I could guess, but I don't want to, so I'm just going to click enter, and it's going to tell me that in the year 2137, both the men and the women will have a time of 8.5 seconds. If there was an Olympics that year, that's what they both would get, according to my equations. So to finish your worksheet, we just kind of finished everything on the front side. What you'd have to do now to finish that assignment is to go to the back side, and on the back of the paper write a paragraph explaining how accurate you think this prediction is. Do you think that in the year 2137